You're 19, carrying a 5-gallon orange bucket of cast iron up a homeowner's basement stairs for $16.23 an hour. Your boots slip on painted concrete because the last step is wet from a pinhole leak that has been dripping for days. Your job title on the paperwork is helper, grouped in federal data with other helpers for pipe layers, plumbers, pipe fitters, and steam fitters, earning a mean wage around $18.97 an hour, with the bottom end under $15. You are at the lowest rung of one of the higher risk sectors in the American economy because construction and the pipe trades carry elevated rates of injury and musculoskeletal damage compared with the average job. You work in cramped trenches, in crawl spaces under houses, and around sewage lines that can turn those spaces into toxic zones when they rupture. You start your career there. 30 years later, a man in your trade signs a deal worth $183 million for a company that grew out of trucks and technicians doing the same work you are doing today. By that point, private equity investors have quietly bought hundreds of HVAC, plumbing, and electrical companies in just a few years, rolling local service shops into regional and national platforms. You are on a ladder that runs from that helper wage to those transaction headlines. If you like breakdowns of how careers actually progress, like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. You start with a shovel. The pay stub shows roughly $16 an hour, which matches entry postings and the lower quartile of helper wages in the national data. You dig service trenches by hand because the mini excavator is on another job, and the schedule will not wait. The ground is frozen a couple of inches down, so you chip it, pry it, and move mud in buckets. You belly crawl under houses where the clearance is barely 18 inches, dragging your tool bag behind you. You work next to cracked sewage lines and crawl spaces that safety bulletins describe as biohazard zones when raw sewage leaks and saturates the soil and air with pathogens and gases. You learn to recognize the smell of a raccoon latrine immediately because raccoons and other animals turn these spaces into communal toilets, and public health guidance tells you to treat their feces as infectious material. Your lungs, knees, and lower back take the impact long before your wages catch up. On paper, your way forward is the apprenticeship. In many states, the path to a journeyman or MasterCard requires 4 to 5 years, roughly 7,500 to 8,500 hours of supervised on-the-job training and hundreds of classroom hours. For plumbers and pipe fitters under typical union standards, that means around 1,700 hours a year on job sites and about 246 hours a year in class, adding up to around 8,500 on-the-job hours and more than 1,200 classroom hours over 5 years. Those figures line up with the 8,000 hours, plus several hundred hours of class, that training programs advertise for plumbing apprenticeships. The math looks simple: 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, for 5 years. The completion data tells you something else. Studies comparing union and non-union construction apprenticeship programs show union tracks graduating a bit over half of their plumbing apprentices, while some non-union programs graduate only around a third. Turn that around, and you see what you experience on the job. Roughly half of the people who start down this road never finish enough hours or pass the exams to hold a card that says Journeyman Plumber. As an apprentice, you are also more likely to get hurt than the average worker your age. Analyses of apprenticeship injuries show that young apprentices have non-fatal injury rates above the all-worker average, and broader research shows construction workers suffering job-related injuries at clearly higher rates than non-construction workers. You are learning a trade. The trade is already learning your body. After enough hours and a passed exam, your license changes. You move into journeyman status, and your pay reflects that step. Median hourly wages for plumbers in the United States sit in the low to mid-20s, with many journeymen making around $48,000 a year or more, depending on region and sector. Compared with your helper years, that is a real increase. Your days are still spent on your knees, on ladders, and under houses. Surveys of pipe trade workers show the highest rates of work-related symptoms and lost work time in the back, neck, and knees, driven by awkward postures and long stretches in cramped positions. You feel that timeline in your own body. In your early 30s, your knees ache after a day of kneeling on concrete or gravel, and your shoulders protest every time you hold a press tool overhead or wrestle cast iron into place. Global studies of plumbers and other construction workers report that a majority, often well over half, experience work-related musculoskeletal disorders over a 12-month period, especially in the lower back and knees. In some detailed surveys of plumbers, the 12-month prevalence of these disorders crosses 4 out of 5 workers. The trade pays more than many entry-level white-collar jobs. The injury risk and chronic pain prevalence sit far higher than the all-industry averages. At this stage, you also start financing your own productivity. A professional-grade press tool for copper and other systems, the kind you see on larger jobs, runs into the low thousands of dollars, with many plumbers talking about $3,000 price tags for full press setups. You sign a financing contract for that tool because it lets you crimp joints in seconds instead of sweating fittings with a torch for far longer. You have taken on debt so that your shoulder, your schedule, and your earning power can hold together. The pattern is straightforward. You are making more money, but you are spending more of your body and more of your own capital to keep pace. At some point, the numbers on your pay stub and your overtime push you toward another step. You sit for the master exam where required, file paperwork for a license, and register a business. You sign for a used van. Industry guides put the cost of a service van for a plumbing business anywhere from the mid-teens to the mid-30s for a used or basic new unit, with higher figures for fully outfitted vehicles. You land in the middle and drive off the lot in a used, decently outfitted van that costs you around $28,000 once fees and basic setup are counted. You add that to the tooling you already own. Starting from scratch, checklists say a plumber needs anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 in tools and equipment for cameras, drain machines, leak detectors, and hand tools. You add licensing fees, bonding, and insurance, which run into the low thousands each year. You tack on another few thousand for a functional website, branding, and initial marketing. On paper, you have launched a lean operation somewhere in the $10,000 to $50,000 startup envelope that small business resources describe as typical for a solo plumbing shop. In reality, you have tied your name, your license, and your balance sheet to a used van and a phone number. You quickly learn that the real cost is not the van, it is the lead. Search marketing data shows that plumbing keywords on Google routinely carry average cost per click prices in the $20 to $25 range nationally, and spikes to $40, $50, or more than $60 in competitive markets and during emergencies. Agencies that audit campaigns for plumbers report that once you factor clicks, conversion rates, and wasted spend, many contractors end up paying on the order of $183 to acquire a single plumbing lead from Google Ads. You open your ad dashboard, see those numbers, and realize that every time the phone rings once from search, you may have just spent more than your helper makes in a full day. You need high-ticket jobs and strong close rates just to cover that pipeline. You push harder. You run more service calls yourself to cover marketing, insurance, and the van payment. You take calls from customers after dinner who found you online and expect immediate answers. As your reputation builds, your top line grows. Business model breakdowns for small plumbing outfits show that a 1 or 2 truck shop can reasonably gross several $100,000 a year in revenue, with a 2-truck operation often reaching the mid-six figures to around $1 million in steady markets. You edge toward that $1 million revenue ceiling, and you see what it looks like from the inside. You are on the truck all day, sometimes helping apprentices dig or repair what they missed. You are estimating jobs at 11 p.m., while your spouse learns QuickBooks from online tutorials. Your phone serves as the dispatch system. Your kitchen table doubles as the accounts receivable department. Your health is the buffer when a technician quits or a job blows up the schedule. You have not bought a business that runs without you. You have bought a job with more zeros, more leverage, and more ways to fail. Breaking through that ceiling means turning your operation into something that can be sold. You move off paper schedules and into field service software built for contractors. You implement platforms like Service Titan and similar systems that centralize dispatching, estimating, billing, and technician routing for HVAC, plumbing, and electrical work. You connect them to your accounting software so that, for the first time, you can see gross margin by job instead of relying on instinct. You start selling memberships, not just one-off repair calls. Advisors in this sector push recurring revenue models, maintenance plans, subscription service agreements, and retainer-style arrangements because they stabilize cash flow and increase the valuation multiple when you eventually sell. You build a base of customers who pay monthly or annually for priority service and tune-ups. Those plans turn your book of business into a predictable revenue stream that investors and lenders can model. Scaling with that structure moves you into the world of consolidation. Private equity firms have spent the last decade proving that they can buy fragmented home services companies, plumbing, HVAC, electrical, pest control, bolt them together under centralized systems, and exit at higher multiples. The playbook is direct. They buy a platform company in a region, often one with several $1 million of EBITDA and solid systems. They then spend years acquiring smaller add-on shops at lower multiples, standardizing branding, software, and back-office functions. Industry commentary describes how these platforms run hundreds of technicians across markets, with dispatch, marketing, and financial reporting handled centrally to extract more margin from the same trucks. Recurring revenue from service memberships becomes a core asset rather than an optional extra. For plumbing and HVAC, this strategy has scaled into substantial numbers. By the early 2020s, reports based on deal databases show private equity investors purchasing nearly 800 HVAC, plumbing, and electrical companies in just a few years. That is the backdrop while your local competitors change logos and answer phones under new brand names. On the high end of this ladder, you see transactions like the sale of Clockwork Home Services. In 2010, Direct Energy announced a $183 million deal to acquire the assets and business of Clockwork, a home services group built around franchised plumbing, HVAC, and electrical brands founded and led by Jim Abrams. Clockwork started as a collection of service trucks and technicians and grew into a network serving millions of households before that sale. The check did not go to the person crawling under houses. It went to the owner of the platform. You see the same structure amplified in newer deals. Alpine Investors, a private equity firm focused on software and services, built Apex Service Partners as a platform in HVAC, plumbing, and electrical. In 2023, they closed a $3.4 billion single-asset continuation transaction dedicated to Apex, effectively rolling the company into a new vehicle so existing investors could take liquidity while funding another stage of growth. Subsequent reporting values Apex in the $10 billion range after later minority investments, with billions of equity committed by large institutional investors. Again, the money moves at the level of platforms, EBITDA multiples, and continuation funds, not at the level of the individual technician soldering joints in an attic. When you reach this point in your own path, your days look different. You spend more time in meetings about marketing budgets, technician recruiting, and potential acquisitions than you do pulling toilets. You speak in numbers that bankers understand. You describe your business in terms of adjusted EBITDA, maintenance membership counts, and customer acquisition cost payback periods, because that is the language buyers use. You sit across from a fund that has already bought dozens of companies like yours. They review your Service Titan dashboards, your recurring revenue, your technician retention metrics, and your clean financials, then decide what multiple of earnings they will pay. The check you negotiate may never reach 9 figures. The structure is the same as the deals that do. At the top of the ladder, the person cashing a $183 million check or signing off on a $3.4 billion continuation fund has not spent the last decade hauling buckets up basement stairs. He has spent it building systems, brands, and financial statements that detach his income from his knees and shoulders. You are still in the same trade. The pipes, the code books, and the customers are the same. Somewhere along the way, the ladder splits between craft and commerce. Commerce pays more, often by a factor of 2 or more, because it sells the labor of others instead of its own. By the time the platform you helped build gets sold, the man signing the $183 million exit check has not soldered a copper joint in a decade. He has effectively exited the trade without needing to pick up a wrench again.